Welcome to the Spiritist Companion Podcast. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'll be your companion on this journey where we will study, reflect, and put Spiritist teachings into practice. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to subscribe and follow our weekly episodes released every Monday. Today we're going to be talking about materialism, what it is, how it affects our journey here, and what Spiritism teaches us about transcending it. So what is materialism? Well, materialism in its broadest sense is the belief that only matter exists and that everything, including consciousness and human experience, can be explained through physical processes alone. In moral and social terms, materialism often manifests as attachment to possessions, to wealth, to power, to appearances, to things that are fleeting and external. In the Spirits book, question 799, Kardec asks, in what way can Spiritism contribute to progress? And they answer by saying, by destroying materialism, which is one of the sores of society and thus making man understand where their true interest lies. So here they are talking about the true interest, so they're talking about the enlightenment that comes from knowing that not everything is material. The knowledge that we are not our bodies, we are souls temporarily inhabiting a physical body. Matter, therefore, is a tool, not our lasting identity. But are there consequences to the belief that we're just a body or everything is material and random and there's no soul, no consciousness, no nothing? In the Gospel according to Spiritism, we learn that materialism numbs the soul to its true purpose. Because if life ends when the body dies, why bother being good? Why sacrifice? Why forgive? Love deeply? Renounce a harmful desire? If everything is gonna go to waste after we leave the body, if everything will be a nothing after this, why bother? The spirits tell us that materialism leads to selfishness. It prompts the pursuit of immediate pleasure at the expense of moral duties. So when we're talking about selfishness and pride, the two scourges of our moral development, we're directly talking about how materialism impacts those. And that's exactly what we see around us, don't we, my friends? When material success becomes the ultimate goal, people are reduced to what they own or produce. We measure worth by appearance or how much money somebody has in their bank account, how much success they have achieved. And in the process of doing that, we silence the voice of the conscience. We silence the voices that tell us about the spiritual life, about the true purpose of the soul. It is important to note as well that Kardec was not against science or progress, quite the contrary. Spiritism embraces rational inquiry but reminds us of the soul. We learn that the feeling of emptiness that some people experience, for example, even when surrounded by material abundance, can oftentimes come from a lack of faith and understanding of the spiritual realities. So the person surrounds themselves with all the material goods, with wealth, with power, with many titles, successes, but they still feel empty. Why is that? Are we really putting our attention where it needs to be put? Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, who was a great Brazilian doctor and spiritist, when he was alive, he was one time confronted by a materialistic friend. He was called to public debate even. But his answers helped pierce the veil of materialism by asking his opponent to bring all those that materialism had saved, all of those that materialism had truly confronted, all of those that materialism had dragged from the depths of despair back to a fulfilled life. Of course, they were not able to do that. So this feeling of emptiness comes from this attachment to the material things, to the ephemeral things, to all those aspects that will stay behind. Or in other words, it comes from a lack of faith and understanding of spiritual realities. And that's what we can call sometimes existential emptiness, which is this deep, unexplainable dissatisfaction. Even with success, money, comfort, something feels missing. The benefactor Emmanuel, who wrote through the hands of Chico Xavier, tells us that material goods are instruments, they're not purposes. When the instrument becomes the master, the soul forgets its mission. So what is the Spiritist invitation, therefore? It is not to abandon matter, but to put it in its rightful place. We live in a material world, and material resources can be useful and necessary. The danger, therefore, is in becoming enslaved by them, thinking that they actually define our values. So there's nothing wrong with trying to work so you can live a better life. The problem is being enslaved by money, by status, and forgetting about the matters of the spirit. This excessive attachment to material things, as we often see, can result in many problems for the soul when it's trying to move on, or when it's faced with the undeniable reality of life after death. And we don't take anything from this life that's material. We understand that the only thing we bring with us after we die are the virtues that we developed, not the riches that we have accumulated. In fact, our dear Master Jesus has many passages talking about this excessive attachment to material things. In Matthew chapter 6, he talks about storing treasures. So he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." He was talking about the true treasures of the soul. Those are the ones we must seek, not the ones that will stay behind or can be taken away from us. Even in chapter 22 of Matthew as well, where he's asked about the coin, and he says, whose face is there? And they say, it's Caesar's, so what do we do? And should we pay the tribute? And he says, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." He was calling their attention to not becoming severely attached to the things that are ephemeral, to the material things, such as the coin that they were showing him and the tribute. Additionally, we also have that passage where the young man came to Jesus and inquired about how he could obtain eternal life, and Jesus told him to dispose of all his worldly goods and follow him. The Master was not establishing an absolute principle that everyone should get rid of everything they possess, nor that this is the only price to be paid for salvation. It was meant to demonstrate that attachment to worldly goods is an obstacle in our path. The young man in this case had judged himself to be released from further struggle because he had observed certain commandments, and therefore he refused the idea of abandoning all the worldly goods he possessed. So his desire to obtain eternal life did not run to the extreme of acquiring it through this sacrifice. Alternatively, we can also talk about the many parables that Jesus mentioned that touch on the subject of materialism. Well, one of them we find on Luke 12, where a man accumulated a great wealth, built new barns to store it, and says to himself, "Now relax, eat, drink, and enjoy." But that night he died, and then God said, "This night your soul will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" So Spiritism helps us understand that the true inheritance is spiritual. Wealth is not wrong in itself, But when it becomes our God, it obscures the light of the soul. It's all about how we use the wealth, how we use the certificates, the titles, the status. Because after all, matter is an instrument, it's not the purpose. Joanna de Angelis, who wrote through Divaldo, she talks about how the void generated by the denial of the spirit leads to anxiety, compulsive behavior, and emotional imbalances. So she's analyzing the scourge of materialism from a psychological perspective. She talks about how only a spiritual worldview can restore the inner harmony. And that, my dear friends, is an invitation for us to recognize that our suffering often stems from this identity crisis, quote unquote, mistaking ourselves for the temporary instead of the eternal. And then we get lost in that mistake, and we see the consequences of it. We know that we humans, we have the mission of working for the material betterment of this planet as well. But it is through ill usage that humanity constantly turns what could be most useful into something pernicious. We learn this in the Gospel according to Spiritism. We also learn that this is a consequence of the inferior state of earthly life. If only wrongdoing and mischief could be produced by riches or by anything that is material, then God would not have placed them upon earth. We would not have those things at our disposal to use as instruments if they were purely evil. So it's not necessarily the instrument, but the use that we make of wealth, status, riches, and things like that. So how do we live in the world, use its tools, enjoy its beauty, without falling into the trap of materialism? Is there any way that we can apply this knowledge? Yes. Here are 3 practical suggestions. 1. Practice detachment. Not indifference, but conscious appreciation without clinging. Enjoy what you have at your disposal, but know that it is temporary. Use it the best that you can, but do not get overly attached to it. Number 2, cultivate inner riches. So spend time in self-reflection, prayer, study, service, charity. These are the treasures that Jesus talked about, those treasures that no one can steal from you. So cultivating the virtues. And number 3, see people, not products. So in a world that objectifies, connect with others beyond their roles, beyond their titles, beyond what they have, beyond their appearances. Try to deeply connect with people, understanding that in front of you is a spirit that is also immortal, that has also trailed a specific trajectory and may need your help. As Emmanuel reminds us, nothing that belongs to the body lasts, but everything that comes from love will remain. So a final thought here about true wealth. Material things serve us. They do not define us. We are spirits, eternal, loved, capable of transformation. Being here is already a testament that we are capable of change and transformation. We are not here to accumulate things, but maybe accumulate virtues. True wealth, remember this, my friends, is the good that we do. All that is spent for love and charity is converted into heavenly treasure. May we remember that, especially in a world of endless distractions, especially in a world that is so focused on the ephemeras, on the material things. Thank you so much for being with me today in this episode of the Spiritist Companion podcast. As usual, if this message touched your heart, please consider sharing it with a friend. Every Monday we publish a new reflection, and every other Friday a new episode of the Parables of Jesus. Until next time, stay peaceful, stay kind, and walk with the Spirit. With fraternal love, your Spiritist companion.